This is Let's Talk Big, the big read with Jane Berger and Jen Hazel. The Owens Community College Campus Big Read is taking place now and throughout the semester, with the goal of bringing awareness of different perspectives through books. The Campus Read book is A Little Less Broken, How an Autism Diagnosis Finally Made Me Whole by Marian Schembari. It's the story of one woman's decades-long journey to a diagnosis of autism and the barriers that keep too many neurodivergent people from knowing their true selves. Now, sharing passages, topics, and events related to the book are Director of Library Services, Jane Berger, and Professor of English, Jen Hazel.
Welcome to Let's Talk Big, everyone. I'm Jen Hazel, and I have with me Jane Berger and
Vickie Heck.
So, Vickie, thanks for coming today. Jane, do you have a passage?
My favorite question. Well, I just happen to have a passage, still kind of at the beginning of the book since we're still getting into the meat of it. Here we go. I'd seen Adam hand flapping before, though it wasn't until decades later that I'd understand it. At their very basic level, self-stimulating behaviors, or stimming, are repetitive movements we do when we're overwhelmed or excited. Hand flapping isn't the only stim, and autistic people aren't the only ones who do them. Common stims include biting your nails, twirling your hair, jiggling your foot, or cracking your knuckles. Most people have at least one comforting habit, and the most accepted theory is that these physical movements help lower stress, cope with boredom, and relieve excess energy. When neurotypicals do them, we call it fidgeting, which is not nearly as pathologized as stimming. That was a mouthful.
That was it was tough to get out.
In an autistic person, stimming can involve socially unacceptable behaviors like rocking, bouncing, spinning, repetitive blinking, sniffing, skin picking, and speaking certain words or sounds out loud. Many autistic people say these movements help relieve their stress as well as simply being enjoyable. The most beautiful explanation I've heard about stimming is by Amelia Baggs in her YouTube video, In My Language, where she describes her rocking, singing, waving, and playing as being in constant conversation with every aspect of my environment, reacting physically to all parts of my surroundings, an ongoing response to what is around me. Regardless of the reason, these movements can be deeply stigmatizing and isolating when done in public. I've heard from many autistics who were told that their stims were disruptive and to cut it out, but suppressing a stim can cause even more anxiety. What if instead of seeing your tics as uncontrollable, you think of them as your body's way of soothing itself? Now I have a very current and relevant story that I'm going to share before I forget.
Okay.
So
I'm so glad. I was hoping you would.
So I know a young lady. She just graduated from high school. She has autism and she is nonverbal. She is the sweetest thing you'd ever want to meet. She has an older sister who is starting medical school out of state. So this past weekend, they were moving her in her new apartment in Missouri. And because she was out of routine, it was unfamiliar, she's a little sad about, missing her sister and this whole new set of changes. She was sitting on the couch in her sister's new apartment and making noises. That's kind of what she does to kind of relieve, as we just read. So they were heading out, and they saw a note taped on the door of the apartment, the outside door of the apartment, that said, "The constant noises are really disruptive. The walls are very thin and I can hear everything. Please stop it." Now, here's a person, they've never set eyes on this other person. This is their first introduction to this area. Can you imagine? Didn't even have the guts to knock and introduce him or herself and then kind of maybe assess the situation. And this gal's mom wrote such a nice little blurb on Facebook about this and how, her daughter loves to talk, and she talks through, is it an AAC? AAC device. And she's so smart, so intelligent, so caring, and she loves to educate people about autism. And she didn't even have the opportunity. How sad that this happened to them. anyway, that's my story because it fit perfectly.
It does
with
fit
this,
perfectly
Yep,
with
with this
this.
passage that people don't understand. They think it's disruptive, and just like flipping a switch, stop. Okay, sure.
I do think as a nation, I think we've gotten better. Imagine back in the day,
Right.
because I'm a little bit older. So imagine back in the day, and what they did with these people and how, they probably wouldn't even have written a letter. They might have put them in an asylum or something like that. So I do think, and I remember when my kids started going to school, inclusion they were in, and so they're very adaptable, and so what we don't want to do is pigeonhole them.
Right.
And because their behaviors are what I call them off-putting, and so they're just different, and I think what we all try and do, I know what I try and do, is just educate people.
Yes.
Is just educate them and just
Inform.
say, and we have things, like they were talking about, this, I do this a lot.
I do that.
Where
I
we're
bounce
doing
my
things
knee.
for soothing, and even if somebody's diagnosed with autism, we have to be aware of, to me, what level they're in, and so if you have, kids, I worked with kids a lot, and they're perhaps head banging or something, people need to understand too that they're getting something out of that, okay? And so usually studies indicate it's releasing some kind of hormones or something's being released, and it's that, oh, I feel good. And so that's why they do it. And hence the repetition that they have, because it makes them feel good. And we do things that make us feel good all of the time. So, of course, we don't want anybody to hurt themselves, but it's kind of, it's that whole education. Do I think we've gotten better? Yes. Do I think we have a million miles to go? Probably.
Yep. But
Right.
it's so
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah.
We just have to have conversations.
Right.
We just have to talk
Right.
about it. We have to inform. When you were saying that you, worked with kids,
Yeah.
I also
Yeah.
worked with kids.
Yeah.
And this particular young lady, was a student at the school that I was at, and I was in the library, and that was
Imagine
her.
that.
I know, my happy place. She.
I used to be a librarian.
See?
You probably didn't know.
I didn't know that. That'll be a side
That'll be a sidebar.
podcast.
Yes.
Um,
Okay.
Anyway, she and her aide would come into the library when she was overstimulated, and it was her
Right,
break
right.
place. And I had little ones, like little preschool kids, who I would bring in for library class. And so when I went to pick them up, I said, you're going to find a friend
Right,
in there.
right.
She makes noises, and it's not because it's not for any other reason other than she's excited to see you, and she doesn't have words to be able to
Right,
convey
right.
that like maybe you or I do. So that's how she moves her hands a lot. And so I expect when we walk in and before you take your spot on the floor, that you will look at her and welcome
Right,
her and
and
say
welcome
hi.
her and understand
And I said, if maybe today you're not comfortable with that, I know by next week you will.
Yeah.
And sure enough,
Right,
they all walked in, they waved to her, sat down. Next week, everybody said, hi. And then, I don't know, a few weeks later, she was sick, so she wasn't there. They were, well, where is she? Why isn't she here today? So they came to be very comfortable and smile, and it was just such a wonderful. I don't want to say it was a relationship, but certainly an introduction, and it was wonderful for them
So
to
much
know.
better than it was
Correct,
20
right,
years
yeah.
ago,
Absolutely.
30, 40. Because we have some students here, that are older, and I just always have to tell everybody, well, they weren't included in things. Think about what was going on 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so, much more inclusion than they used to be. So they probably got put somewhere. So, when we see the off-putting things or we see the regulation isn't there and all of that, there's a reason for that.
Well, in a lot
Yes.
of ways too, Vickie, and you and I have spoken about this before, it's also like that's what they remember.
Yes.
And so they're expecting that they have to defend themselves.
Defend themselves, yes. Yes.
Because of the understanding.
Right.
And again, like you've said, Vickie, it's so much better, but we still have a very long way to go. And and the other thing is too, like thinking about this, people of a certain generation weren't exposed in the same way. And if you didn't
Yes.
go to a school that integrated,
Yes.
it's not something that
Right.
you would have
Have
experienced.
Experience.
Right.
True.
And I
True.
remember one of my siblings once said to me, so right around the time that my son was diagnosed, and I've talked about that before on here, with autism, was like, well, I don't know that I know anyone with autism. And I said, you know tons of people with autism. You don't know you know.
Well, they just don't raise their hand and go,
Right.
by the way.
And
Yeah, right.
because
Yeah, right.
going to,
Yes.
like, we went to private schools.
right.
If someone was diagnosed, quite often, it's better now, like,
Right.
because
Yep.
you were at a private
Right.
school, Jane, when you were
Right.
working with this student. But what we remember and what we know is the asylum, is
Right.
because we only think of everyone being a level 3. We
Right.
don't think about the fact that it's a spectrum and that
Yes.
those
Right.
multiple levels with it. Like, we assume that everyone is of a certain level that needs a certain support, when sometimes support is low versus
Right,
support
right.
being, more.
And basically, hope all people are good, and
Yeah.
that if you explain things well enough. Are we allowed to talk about we're building rooms? Because we're aware here at Owens.
Yes, absolutely. We can do that, and then we'll probably have to wrap up, but let's do it.
Okay, so I run counseling services. I don't run counseling services. I'm a counselor. And so we've realized we need to reach out to, and we need to have rooms. And so in counseling services, we're building a room, and we have fantastic chairs and low lighting and all. And so anybody can come in that's having a very stressful day, or somebody that's diagnosed with something, and just sit down. Okay, so they don't even need to visit me. I've got a QR code. They're going to come in. I'm going to get something. This is somebody's in the room. There you go. That's how I'm doing it in my area, and I know you're doing some other rooms.
We are working on making some of the study spaces where they are more friendly, lower lighting, a little more flexible seating that will be available for individuals who need those at whatever time you need them.
Right.
So there'll be some signage, and we just ask that everyone, if you don't need that room at that time, you leave it for someone who may be coming
Right,
to be
right,
able to
right.
use it. And I think that will really help. So it'll be some spaces. We have a lot of quiet spaces here, but we don't have quiet spaces that are necessarily friendly for certain
Right.
needs.
And I do want to say that money, a lot of the money for the equipment or any of that thing came from Ohio's mental health support. So I just can't speak highly enough for that grant money that's supporting all of this. Yes.
Absolutely. Well, when we moved, no, that's okay. When we moved the library a couple of years ago, we made sure, that all of our smaller study spaces all have flexible seating, lighting, lighting preferences. So if you just happen to be there, or that's the closest space to where you are, and you just, feel like you need to get away, check out one of the rooms in the library.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to do it for us. Thank you, Vickie,
Thank
so
you.
much
You
for
are
being
welcome.
here.
We always
And
love
for
you.
Great book.
and for remembering to talk about that. I think it's
Yeah.
super important.
Yeah.
So on behalf of myself and Jane and Vickie, keep talking big.
This has been Let's Talk Big. Catch Let's Talk Big anytime on the RSS feed or the Owens Outcome Plus YouTube channel. Be sure to like and subscribe. Join us again for Let's Talk Big, the big read with Jane Berger and Jen Hazel.
On the phone.